The nervous system is divided into the CNS, which involves the brain and spinal cord, and the PNS, which is any other nerve that is not part of these two structures. It also contains the efferent nervous system, which has two subunits of its own, the autonomic and somatic systems. The somatic system is the voluntary control of muscle contractions. So think when you're exercising in the gym, you'll be using your somatic system to voluntarily move the weights. The autonomic is the automatic level, which is divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic stimulation, which respectively mean increasing and decreasing. So essentially, reactions have 5 steps, and the first one is the stimulus, which is the main reason why the reaction happens in the first place. So imagine, as an example, that a punch is coming towards you. In this case, your eyes are going to be the receptor that senses this punch and, well, communicates with your coordinator that will then tell your effector, in this case the muscles in your legs and abs, to perform a response. In this example, it would be dodging, perhaps not in such a cool way, but you get what I mean. Cardiac control is when your brain and your heart communicate via the cardiac nerve or the vagus nerve. The cardiac nerve is responsible for sympathetic stimulation or increasing heart rate. Same thing, it is stimulated by the hormone epinephrine, and the vagus nerve is responsible for the opposite function, in this case stimulated by the hormone acetylcholine. The structure of the brain responsible for this is the cardiac control center, and for the heart it is the sinoatrial node, also known as its pacemaker. So cardiac control is divided into 3 other types of control. We're going to skip neural control for now and look at these 2. Hormonal control involves the hormones that you just saw, so epinephrine and acetylcholine, and just have in mind that this hormone of epinephrine could be in the form of anticipatory rise. An example of this would be if you're about to make a big jump. In this case, your adrenal glands will secrete this epinephrine in order to increase your heart rate so that you are more prepared for this jump. Intrinsic control involves the myogenic sense of the heart, which basically means that it can sense its own conditions and control itself. For example, it can sense higher contractility and temperature and respond accordingly. Neural control essentially involves the different receptors. So for propio or mechanoreceptors, we have examples such as the Golgi tendon organ and the muscle spindle. They essentially detect changes in pressure and tension, though for muscles it also includes the stretch. Then there's chemoreceptors that detect changes in, well, chemical levels as suggested by the name. There's oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH levels in the blood. Then there's baroreceptors that involve blood pressure, so they adjust the blood vessel diameter by manipulating the lumen. And lastly, there's thermoreceptors that detect changes in body temperature. The optimal body temperature in humans is around 37 degrees Celsius, and anything highly above that or below that will trigger the activation of the hypothalamus that receives information from thermoreceptors in the blood and skin. In hot conditions, the following processes will happen. There's vasodilation in the limbs and skin. This is essentially the expansion of blood vessels in order to release heat. And vasoconstriction is the opposite process that happens in the core. You will obviously sweat, and in cold conditions, the vasodilation this time happens in the core, and the vasoconstriction happens in the limbs and skin in order to tighten the blood vessels and prevent heat loss in these cold conditions. You will get goosebumps, which is caused by the contractions of erector pili muscles, these little dots under the hairs. And lastly, you will also have shivering caused by the involuntary contractions of skeletal muscles. Moving on to the second section of this topic, we have the 3 types of regulation from the endocrine system. So there's the signals from the nervous system we saw before. An example of this is the increase in heart rate during intense exercise that involves the whole process of the adrenal glands, adrenaline, and sympathetic stimulation. Then we have the humoral regulation, which involves the blood chemistry. An example of this is the secretion of insulin to suppress high blood glucose levels. And lastly, we have the hormonal responses to other hormones, An example of this is during the menstrual cycle, when estrogen peaks, the hormones of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone will increase accordingly. So they are essentially responding to this other hormone of estrogen. Another detail is that the endocrine system is slower and has longer lasting effects than the nervous system. Have in mind that some hormones are going to be considered steroids and some are going to be considered non-steroids. An example of this is adrenaline, and for steroids we have estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. So looking at these different hormones, here we have the glands responsible for their secretion, we have the usual effects, and let's just focus on these possible effects on female athletes. So there's the glycogen sparing effect and the increased risk of joint injury that estrogen causes. This effect is essentially using fats for energy more than glucose. Then we have the thermoregulating effect from progesterone, also on female athletes, which increases the demand for hydration. You don't really need to memorize these effects for the other three hormones, but I do recommend studying the effects and glands very well.